Welcome to More Than Miles, the podcast where we use storytelling and expert interviews to widen the lens on what it means to be a happy and healthy endurance athlete. We believe that athletes are so much more than their body, sport, and training miles. I'm Dr. Kate Mihevik-Edwards.
And I'm Dr. Kacy Sinders. We are endurance athletes, physical therapists, and huge coffee addicts. We spend most of our time treating, educating, and working with endurance athletes. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Now let's get to the show. Hello, everybody. Good evening for us. Whenever you happen to be listening to this podcast, good afternoon, good morning, good evening to you too. We're really excited to have Kelsey Beckmann on today. She's a licensed registered dietitian. We're really excited because this is a topic that's important for us, seeing people injured in the clinic. And so she has a lot of great knowledge to share with us today. So welcome, Kelsey.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. You guys already look like you're having fun. So I kind of already know how the next few minutes are going to go.
Yes, that's a work hazard. We have too much fun.
Love it.
Yes. I don't know if it's a work hazard. I think it's a work benefit, but
Yeah. All right. That's true.
So we were talking a little bit before, and I have to disclose my creeper status here with setting up this interview because I follow Kelsey on Instagram, which she will show you how to do that at the end of the conversation. I really love the way that she talks about the intersection of endurance sports and nutrition. I think that there's a lot of holes in the culture there, and to have someone filling that gap makes me really happy. And I think it's going to be really useful for a lot of our listeners. So we're super excited, like we've said probably 5 times already. But where I want to start actually is, Kelsey, can you tell us the difference between a registered dietitian and a nutritionist? Because I know that this is an important distinction to make when someone's looking for nutrition advice.
Yeah, so you probably already know that question. We can get super sassy about it. So as I've gotten more experience, I try not to, my level of sass kind of declines. But when we first come out of school, we're like all fired up about our credentials. So as far as a registered dietitian, we go to an undergraduate in nutrition dietetics, and then we have to match to an internship that's a supervised practice. And that's where we get a lot of our applicable skills. So for example, I had rotations in the hospital where you go through so many different disease states and work with all kinds of things. There's a community rotation. So a lot of times working with low income populations, a lot of populations with food insecurities. And then you kind of get to pick. So I picked sports nutrition for like a last rotation. And so I actually was really fortunate and got to work in Orlando with the Orlando Magic and University of Central Florida. So I got a lot of really cool experience. That was easily my favorite rotation. And then I forgot to mention one thing. We do a lot of what people don't realize dietitians do too, is like a lot of the food production in like hotels or even hospitals and stuff like that. So we get a little bit of experience there. And so after we get done with that supervised practice, we can sit for an exam. And then just like you guys, we have continuing that we have to keep up with and so forth. And so a nutritionist, anybody can call themselves a nutritionist with no formal training. Not to say that someone that doesn't have their RD credential, it doesn't know what they're talking about. I have experienced all different levels of education, but definitely registered dietitians are put through some pretty thorough training.
Thank you for clearing that up. I think even being in the field, in the medical field, sometimes we're not really sure. So it can be very confusing for the regular person if people in the medical world aren't even sure what the difference is. So I think that's great too. Yeah. We also wanted to talk a little bit. We usually start off with actually talking about the running story. What is your running story? How did you fall in love with it, if you actually are in love with it still, or was at any point? But how did you fall in love with running? Tell us about you.
I grew up playing soccer, actually. I played college soccer. I had concussions my sophomore year and just was in a place where like, I don't know if I was in like, I was so concussed, but like I just was kind of emotionally done with soccer. And so I transferred out of that university, and my parents were in shock that I didn't want to finish soccer because they like couldn't get me off the soccer field. But it was one of the best quits I've ever done. And I ended up going to school as a normal college kid, and I got a part-time job, and I loved my part-time job. And a lot of my friends in this part-time job were runners. And so one of them told me that she signed me up for a 50K. I had never ran a race before.
Sorry. I mean, that's just really way to jump in, huh?
I had no idea. And I remember like not even asking, like, is that more than a marathon? I was just like, a 50K? Okay.
What's this extra zero in here? Isn't this supposed to be 5K?
Wow. I'm the epitome of say yes and ask questions later, apparently. And so it was in like North Georgia. It was very hilly. She kept telling me, she's like, we need to train. And this person that I was training with is the most laid back person that I know. And so our training wasn't even like a set amount of miles or anything, but somewhere out in that course, I fell in love with running. And apparently I still had a lot of competitiveness that was unfulfilled in soccer, because I decided not only do I love running, but I love racing. After that, I kind of signed up for other local races and then got a coach and kind of got the bug that I wanted to do every distance. And I think the community is just really fun. It's a really organic way to connect with people and make friends. And I feel like in your adult life, it's hard to make friends. And so running really does help connect you to people. And I mean, there's nothing like learning about someone when you're going to be stuck with them for 20 miles.
That's the best time to be stuck with somebody, really, is when you don't know them and you can really learn so much. I think some of my best conversations were during runs. Some of the most difficult things going on in my life, I was able to work out on a run.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so crazy. Like some of the stories and things that you share with the people that you run with, it's like, oh my goodness, what would happen if you didn't have that time?
Kelsey, you're leaving out that you qualified for the Olympic trials and ran it here in Atlanta last year.
Oh, also just a small thing, just like the 50K.
Little thing.
Yes. I got a coach and I remember like doing my first 10K and I ran like the pace that I would have need to run to qualify. And he told me, he's like, I was so excited about this 10K and I thought it was so fast. And he was like, well, you're going to run that for a marathon one day. And I thought he was crazy. I'm like, how do you know that? It's a 6-mile race. How do you know that? But he was right. It was just a really cool experience, especially to feel like I was successful in something after feeling like I hadn't like exactly crushed my goal of playing college soccer. Like I got there, but I didn't finish it. So it felt like things really came full circle for me.
Wow. So many athletes go through that. They have this idea of who they're going to be and what they're going to achieve. As athletes, we plan and we train and we do all of these things to make sure that the outcome is correct. But then you can't really predict what's going to happen. And so I think that's really interesting. And so many of our patients struggle with that whole thing of just having to let something go. But it's really great when you can find something else to fulfill a lot of those desires and needs.
Yeah, I think that we hold our sport like really closely and a lot of our identity gets wrapped up in it. Even with running, I'm like, ooh, I never want it to be like as serious as soccer was. And I deal with that for sure with my clients that, you know, what happens when they get hurt and their thing that they identify themselves gets pushed aside.
Yeah. Any medical professional struggles with athletes. It just always comes up somehow.
So I know that you own your own business, Meteor Nutrition. Tell us a little bit how that came about, because there's plenty of sports nutritionists out there, but sports nutrition is one thing. And I think running or endurance nutrition is a complete other thing. So tell me a little bit about how your business came about.
I knew playing at college soccer that I'm going to date myself with this. I worked with a few college programs. I'm like, back in my day.
That's how I feel.
I'm like, you don't have it that bad. Back when we had the food pyramid, I didn't know what to eat. So I just remember going to the dining hall and just being like, how am I like a Division I athlete? And I have a girl over here that gets to play every minute and she's eating like a sloppy Joe. And then there's another girl that's like eating a salad. What am I supposed to eat? And I remember being really, really fascinated with it because over the last decade or so, we've gotten so much more information. And I don't think that when I played college soccer, I knew what a dietitian was. I was just really fascinated on like what the role was and what was the potential of food really within an athlete. When I transferred back, there was nutrition and dietetics as a major. And so I was just so curious. And so I'm like, what does that even mean? And so I started that major not knowing what a dietitian was. Actually, I've had a few interns that don't necessarily know the route to become a dietitian. They want to shadow me. I knew that in starting my own business that I wanted to reach athletes at like a different level than maybe what they may have had access to in the past, because I knew that that was something that, no pun intended, I was really hungry for as an athlete in all different stages of my life. And even looking back in high school, like I tore my ACL playing soccer. Even then I was like, typical athlete, like I can't do anything for so long. Do I need to eat more? Do I need to eat less? What do I eat? Should I eat these low fat Triscuits that my mom eats? So yeah, I think I have always wanted to deliver something that I felt like I didn't have as like a youth and college athlete. Being an endurance athlete myself, I hear so much of the chatter around food and bodies and stuff like that. And it's just something that I know for that population, it doesn't have to be that way for them. And so I love helping that population too.
Something that we actually wanted to get into, and you just touched upon, was talking about eating disorders in endurance athletes and body types, and this idea that lighter is faster and what that myth is. So if you could talk a little bit about that, it would be incredible.
Yeah. So I really love, and I actually didn't invent this, but I love the concept of nourishment over numbers. And what that means is like always tracking how many calories you're burning, what your weight is, logging everything into my fitness pal meticulously, being so obsessed with all this wonderful data that we have that can way too much for me. I'm the girl that doesn't have a job. I can't handle it.
Oh my gosh, the data is overwhelming, isn't it? I mean, the same thing happens to us when we think about run gait analysis or whatever. I mean, there's so much data available and it's really great, but then it can also bring us to the other side. And I think endurance athletes, we get in serious trouble because of our personality type with too much data.
Gosh, yeah, I know. People always ask me, they're like, do you track your food? I'm like, no, I'm type A as hell. No. That would be a downward spiral. The nourishment over numbers concept, I think that it's something that in the shortest amount of words, how I like to practice. And with bodies and everything, we're always in tight wearing clothing. I was even watching Nike's like newest documentary on Peacock, one of the apps, and they're talking about how Salazar was so obsessed with body size and everything. So sometimes I'll play the game with clients. I'll be like, okay, we'll say weight's a part of it. Weight's a part of it. Do you know what else is a part of this equation and performance? And more times than not with them, I can name like over a dozen things. So I'm like, for whatever reason, we put this weight part on a pedestal. So if I'll play the game with you and say that that is a variable in performance, here are a dozen other things that are such more simple fixes. And guess what? Fixating on your weight, that can make your body really vulnerable. Guess who's not fast if they're hurt? You know, you kind of have to look at it like that. I'm an athlete. I've definitely transitioning from a soccer player to a runner. My body was very different as a soccer player. I'm a stronger looking runner. People tell me that all the time. They ask me if I do CrossFit and stuff like so. Like I've dealt with that. I think I can understand where their heads are at, but also helping them see the other sides of things. And there's so much more out there and available when we're able to fuel our bodies and do strategic fueling that really supports our training instead of constantly in this battle of under fueling and then feeling like crap in our training and then making our bodies super duper vulnerable.
Yeah, and I think this is where Kate's giving Kelsey a round of applause for all of you who are not tuning in. Yeah, all of that makes me extremely happy because I've struggled with eating disorder pretty much all my life. So from 13 until now, still deal with certain aspects of it, a lot more manageable now. But I'm always thinking about how do we change this, right? Like how do we talk about our bodies and nutrition differently? On what platform is it? Our cross-country coaches and everything probably are like the first line. But I think, I mean, this sounds a little bit weird to say, but social media, I think, is king or queen right now because, you know, young runners looking at all the professional runners and what they look like, and they just assume they need to look like that in order to be faster. And I still deal with this myself. I have to like remind myself constantly because I know it as a fact, because I know it on a cerebral level, but on an emotional level, I don't because of what I see. So again, that just kind of comes back to what I was saying in the beginning is I think that especially like a nutritionist voice talking about food that way is so, so important.
Social media impacts you so subconsciously. Like, oh my goodness. Like, honestly, sometimes my first interventions with someone before we even talk about food is like unfollow X, literally like narrate your feed. We can't talk about food until we have the right mindset and we're not always thinking about I always call it the scarcity mindset. We need less. Our body needs to be smaller. We need to shrink. Those kinds of ideas in our head.
Mindset is one of the number one things that we work with in our practice too. For every single athlete, it's really, really important. In fact, I had a really difficult conversation with an athlete recently that said, I can't see you until you see a sports psychologist. You and I are not going to be able to make progress in the way that we need to because we're not meeting in the middle. Mindset is so important in every aspect of an endurance athlete's health. So you're talking about it from the nutrition standpoint, and it definitely is from the PT standpoint. And I think it really kind of bleeds into every aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. I know, like, being an injured athlete, it's so hard. It's such a roller coaster. One day you're positive, your whatever was hurting feels a little bit better. And then like you do that test run and it doesn't go well. And you're just like, none of this is working. So yeah, I can imagine telling you guys, just because I fit on the other side of like the athlete that thinks that like I'm ready to start training at full speed versus the one that the very next day is like, no, I'm still very hurt.
I know. Along that vein, what do you do with injured runners? A lot of people come into our office and they're restricting their food intake when they're injured. They don't want to gain weight because they're injured and they don't feel like they're burning the calories. From my perspective, that's a bad idea because I believe they need the food and the nutrition in order to heal. Let's talk about that. It's loaded.
It's loaded. So loaded. You guys, just like I fell in love with nutrition because I wanted to be able to provide something I didn't have. I truly do feel like when people are passionate about something, like you guys are doctorates of your craft. Like at some point, like you're passionate about it and you have ties and you've probably been hurt before.
Oh yeah, both of us.
All the time. Touching the hot stove.
Yeah.
A lot of what's really cool, I think, as a practitioner is when you can marry personal experiences of maybe things that you've been through, but also things that your patients, clients have gone through and just witness versus like what you learned in school. And for me, the experiences of being hurt and nutrition of like what I learned in school, they match up in the injured athlete. A lot of like speed of recovery is completely nutrition related. Sometimes I feel like I'm operating out of my scope, but sometimes when like I'm witnessing somebody, whether it's my client, whether it's a training partner, whether it's just another athlete that's not getting better, the first thing that I think is like, okay, if they're doing all of the other things right, I don't care if it's soft tissue, whatever, I wonder how their nutrition is. Healing an injury is an anabolic function. And so if you don't have the raw ingredients to build new cells, build new tissues, if you don't have the energy and the calories to do that, then that injury is not going to heal. So even if we are concerned about our weight, you have to be able to see the other side that as soon as you get into your normal lifestyle, if that's your goal, then it's going to work itself out if that's your number one concern. I would rather be able to train at 100% more of the time for a shorter duration than like my nutrition be lacking and drag on and have a lot of different setbacks and be at 40%, then 42%, and like for weeks and weeks and weeks. And so how I understand the injury process, I think I probably understand it 1%, how you guys understand it. But I just find that like in the initial process, there's the inflammatory phase and nutrition has a role. And then the remodeling phase, that's where a lot of athletes go wrong and like are not confident enough. I always say, try to eat how much you're eating when you're running. And then there's things that you want to prioritize. Sure, we can like try to increase our protein, modestly. If we're increasing our protein, then maybe decrease a little bit of the carbs and really focus on those fruits and vegetables. But from a calorie perspective, I really tell them not to restrict calories because you're only prolonging your time out. And then arguably, it's going to be even longer before you can get into training and feeling like yourself again, if that's the one thing that's super important to you. You really do need those calories to heal. And it's one of those hard conversations that like, I can't promise my clients what their body's going to do while they're healing. But I think that I've heard really high level athletes say the same thing, that their first few injuries, they did it wrong. And now they're just okay with like, if they're going to gain weight, they gain weight and it'll sort itself out. And it's just a part of that process for them. And then their bodies always normalize when they're back.
I know why Kacy's in love with you. Now I am too.
Oh, you guys are ready too.
I get it, Kacy. Is there any way we could go and nerd out a little bit further into that subject of, like you started to talk about the inflammatory stage and the remodeling stage, and you started to kind of break it down. And we don't need to go too deep by any means, but mostly for my benefit, I'm sure. But I'm sure that I think the listeners will like it too. What are some things that you might tell your client if they're injured? Not just, okay, keep up your calories, but are there different kinds of foods they can eat to support each process or things like that?
Yeah. So the biggest thing that I think about when the injury is like an acute injury is kind of in that inflammatory phase, right? And so focusing on anti-inflammatory foods, and that's like a buzzword. Don't overthink it. Lots of fruits and vegetables. Oh my gosh. Eat any of them. They all are loaded with vitamins and minerals that are super anti-inflammatory. I'm a huge fan of omega-3. So if someone will eat food sources of omega-3s, great. If not, turning to the supplement route. And I know a lot of professional college and professional teams, they have kind of a protocol with omega-3s. I like to look at a diet and see if we're getting it through food. And then if not, then looking at things. Then kind of in that remodeling phase, just for the most part, when you're healing an injury, your basal metabolic rate can go up 20%. That is nuts.
That is nuts.
20%, that's a lot. If you're not feeding your body that, and then you're cross training and all these other things, then your body's going to get you to aqua jog. Your body's not going to let you sink. I hope not. That means you're really feeling. Your bodies are super smart. It's going to have it take care of all of the other things. But that's when that BMR increases by 20%. That injury is probably low priority. It's not getting the nutrients that it needs. So increasing protein for sure, that's kind of how we regenerate new tissues and structures and everything. Also super good for your metabolism. So if you are worried about body composition, in school, they teach us everything in kilos. And so if you're an injured athlete that's listening, divide your weight in pounds by 2.2 and then multiply times 1.5 to 2. That's your protein needs. Fun little formula, kind of depending on the type of injury. I still continue anti-inflammatory foods during that process. And then a lot of times I mentioned carbohydrates. They think that they don't need carbohydrates. And just to be clear, I worked in the hospital before I ever opened my business. We gave tiny women with diabetes 45 grams of carbohydrates. And just to break that down, that's the amount of carbohydrates of a sandwich and a banana.
I eat that for breakfast.
Yeah. So if you're an injured athlete, you still need carbohydrates because you're still burning energy. And so if you're not eating enough carbohydrates, guess what you're going to break down as fuel? The one thing you need to heal that dang injury. And so it's still you don't want to overly restrict carbohydrates. You can scale back if you're an athlete that's used to training 10 to 20 hours a week, then maybe you don't need quite as much carbohydrates, but not omitting them completely from your diet. And then really focusing on that protein. And those protein needs that I just talked about, that's pretty high. And so if you're not eating snacks between meals with protein in them, it's going to be pretty hard to get there.
That is so useful. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've always heard the old 0.8 to 1.2 grams per kilogram adage.
Yeah, that's super accurate for basic needs.
Basic needs, right.
Yeah. I go a little bit higher. There's more recent research with runners that's new, fun, and exciting because a lot of runners think they don't need as much protein as contact sports. That's how it was published for a really long time. But there's an updated stance now that protein needs are as high as contact sports, starting at 1.3 all the way to 1.8.
Oh, that's so cool. I think we all see underfueling in endurance athletes. Maybe it's on purpose because of some of the things we talked about before. Maybe they don't even know. So I'm interested to see how you work with athletes and how you get them to fuel properly for their fueled girl fall, which I love because I loved making fun of hot girl summer all summer. And now I'm making all of the fall jokes as well. So I love it. I'm sorry, Kate. I had to.
I love you. It's okay.
Just some of the other information that was putting out hot girl summer. I was oh, this is so painful.
Right.
So
painful. So painful.
Yes. So a lot of, I think that the biggest thing is probably like you guys, like when you get a new patient, do you call them clients or patients?
We call them, well, I think we use it interchangeably. Since we're out of network, we often say clients, but then we'll talk about patients too. So I don't know. We do both.
Okay. I'll keep continuing calling them both.
Yeah.
So I just asked my clients, like, what are your goals? And so I had this girl through a college program, lacrosse player, junior, first year knee injury, second year knee injury, third year COVID. I'm like, you have a lot of like red shirts, but like, how long do you want to be in college? How long do you want to play lacrosse? Like all these things. So she told me, she was like, well, I just want more playing time. And she had bad disordered eating, like one of the worst cases that I've seen in a non-endurance sport. We were talking and my face was just like, which doesn't really happen because I work with endurance athletes.
Right.
Anyway, like just asking her that question of like, what are her goals? And the fact that she wanted more playing time, I'm like, oh my gosh, now I have like the carrot that I can dangle. And so helping her understand that like the more playing time you get, the more you have to be consistently healthy. When we aren't fueling correctly, we are more susceptible to injury and illness. And goodness knows in 2021, we need all the immunity we can get to be engaged in a long season. And so I think that just like understanding like what the goals are and then working on that mindset and that belief system and understanding like what are the roots of the underfueling, like what is that belief system like? Because until we can attack that, I can't really. And everyone's like, when they come to me, they're like, just make me a meal plan. And depending on their
Sorry, I get the same thing. Like, just tell me what exercises to do. And
Tell
I'm
me
like,
the one exercise to do every day.
Sorry. I mean, I'm not laughing. I just get it. I have so much empathy and I completely understand because that's what people want is the one thing. And you're like, we just have to change your complete mindset. That's all.
Yeah, totally. And so I actually was just talking to my fiance about this because I'm like, I feel like these college programs want me to make these like high level fancy meal plans and just knowing specifically college students, I'm like, I can't get them to put a PB&J in their book bag, much less make them a schedule. So yeah, once you can kind of get that belief system, you can work with them and see what those limiting beliefs are. I think that a lot of times that's when the magic happens and the light bulbs go off. And then I work really, really slowly with people. So specifically with this girl, if I told her what to eat from the time she wakes up, from the time she goes to bed, she's not in the proper headspace. That's very overwhelming for her. I went to the biggest gap of her day and I worked on that because that's where we're going to get the most bang for our buck. That's where we're going to build momentum. That's where she's going to build trust in me and understand, hey, if I feel my body a little bit better, breakfast was for her. Nothing crazy is going to happen other than I'm going to feel so much better. And I'm going to start to meet more of my goals. I want them to trust me and know that like that best interest is in there. And by working with what their actual goals are, aside from this is what I think you should be eating from day one, it just doesn't work like that. If they come in and they're not ready to make some of the adjustments.
No, it's really, really hard because you want to help and you want to do everything you can to help them and guide them. But if they're not ready, they're not ready.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to find that like window in and get the trust. You need those two things. Where do you start? And they have to trust you to be able to start there, right?
Yes, totally. And I think that takes a lot of experience to figure out. I was actually sharing with my fiance, I was like, I didn't talk at all in that appointment and I asked a million questions. I've had sessions like that, but I was like, I can't imagine being in like the first, second, third year of my career and operating like that. I probably would have been like, oh my God, you're not eating. I can fix that.
Right?
I'm gonna do it up for you, girl.
Yeah. I love how you spoke to finding what her goals were, like finding that carrot to dangle, because that's what I remember a lot from my experience. Like what really got me to make a change was I was a soccer player growing up too. And I realized I couldn't play soccer if I didn't eat. So first thing I couldn't play soccer if I didn't eat, and I couldn't go to school if I didn't get out of the hospital. So those were like two very basic things, but those were important to me. In fact, those two things are probably arguably what got me there in the first place. But realizing I had gone down the wrong road, eventually bringing it back to my goals. I guess is the point I'm trying to make, was probably the most important thing for me.
Yeah, it has to make sense for you. It has to make sense in your process of how am I going to get from point A to point B. I was also just telling my fiance that it scares the living heck out of me. So when endurance athletes underfuel, very scary, very serious. The process to redness, it doesn't happen overnight. There's acute signs and then there's chronic signs. When contact sports underfuel, I realized for the first time that is terrifying to me because it's contact. There's a lot of like pivoting and turning really quickly. And I'm like, I was so scared for her to do anything else after she left me today. I'm like, can you like wheel yourself back to your dorm? Can we put you in a bubble? Like, I'm scared for you. But with like endurance athletes, of course, it's very serious, but it doesn't, I think because it doesn't happen overnight, that like, if you don't like eat well for a couple of weeks and you play a contact sport, like, I'm just like, oh my gosh, you might need a major surgery. Like, oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they actually say that losing your period is actually like one of the last signs. A lot of people think of it as the first warning sign, and it's actually one of the last signs that has been going on for a long time.
Oh, totally. Totally. I really want there to be a protocol made. I think we should adapt it. A protocol made for like, how long should you be able to get like consistent menstrual cycles until you can go back to sport? Because I have gone to the bottom of the internet looking for a protocol just because like I've gotten an athlete get their menstrual cycle back and be like, I'm good now. And I'm like, no, I think you should wait a little bit longer.
You should probably wait a little bit longer. But it's so hard when they're just waiting and you say, okay, well, when this happens, now you can do this. And yeah, I think there should be something out there. I'm sure somebody is working on it, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully.
What are some simple, basic cardinal rules that people can have to know what's going to be a good way to fuel their body? I guess that was a really bad way to word that question.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So just some basics they could know, I guess, to help guide them.
So the biggest things that I think people are really confused about is like what to eat and when to eat, I think. You know, in terms of like what to eat, a really good starting place that I like to start with my clients, and then we like dial in portions and types and stuff like that, is I really like talking about performance plates. And what that is, it's really just making sure that we're including all the important elements that allow our bodies to operate optimally in one meal. And we should have those at every meal. Carbohydrates, protein, and then I always say color, and then I like to add in flavor because it has to be sustainable. Fat is pretty easy to come by, but that is something, if they're not eating a lot of fat for whatever reason, we will incorporate in a performance plate. So in terms of like starting there, a lot of times when they're, you know, maybe they're just eating non-starchy vegetables and some protein in a salad, see it all the time. Or they're, you know, have the bachelor diet of just some ramen or something like that, then going to start there to make it more well-rounded. And why that's so important to do with every meal. First of all of the needs are so high that for athletes that it's really hard to get, if you don't get them in every meal, it's hard to reach the total amount that you require during the day. And then also there's something really beautiful that happens when you eat those foods in combination, that your body's like, you know what? I got what I need. I'm satisfied. I can move on to the next task, because I know a lot of athletes get really frustrated with feeling hungry all of the time. And more times than not, they're just not eating the right combination of foods, or they're simply just not eating enough food. And all of those foods have roles. So when you cut out one of those foods, your body no longer gets the benefit of that food group. So I really like to teach my clients to do that with every meal. The next thing that I like to teach them is eating every 3 to 4 hours, sometimes even more, as frequently as every 2 hours, depending on their goals, except for when we're sleeping. So that kind of cuts out the idea of trying to fast or anything like that. And why I think that's really important is to preserve lean body mass, to make sure that their energy is high throughout the day. And then just make sure, like when we're going longer than that, we are more likely to to overindulge, which isn't the end of the world. But most of the time, if we're trying to jump into an activity, we feel the best when we're not overindulging. Also, when we go a long time without eating, we're more likely to eat foods that aren't as strategic for performance. So those foods have a time and place, but a lot of times, when we're trying to fuel our bodies with things that really promote performance, then if we're hangry all the time, we tend to crave more of the low density, what I call survival foods. So those are foods that are more sugary or more heavy and stuff like that might not make us feel our greatest when we're trying to do something that we love to do.
I feel very seen right now because we have this peanut butter monster trail mix in the office right now.
From Target.
And it is so good. And it's all I want when I've been treating patients straight and lunch is far away or lunch already happened. And it's so dangerous. I think we just bought a whole nother tub of it today.
That's like the epitome of survival food, because you have like the fat in there that's like, hey, Kacy, you haven't ate in several hours. This would take care of it. This would be the dense thing that you need. And then there's also the M&Ms that what happens is our blood sugar levels dip. And so your body just is like, glucose, please glucose. And your body's number one goal for you is to always survive. And so I think that is delicious. I think that if we were working together, I would find a way to work it in.
Yeah, it's definitely one of my survival foods. My treatment room isn't even that close to the snack drawer, and I hear it calling my name at like 10:30 a.m. every day.
She shows her love through food. So she knows what everybody likes and she stocks the drawers with what everybody likes. No, it's so kind. It's so kind. And I mean, at one point we're like, hey, we need vegetables and fruit too. Please don't keep giving us all this stuff. So she's been fantastic.
Sweet. She's a gem. Take care of her.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, we do.
All right, guys. Well, I think we're going to start wrapping it up and doing our last few questions. Are you ready?
Ready.
Okay. All right. So our first question we like to ask is, what is the thing that you regularly do to take care of yourself?
Sleep.
Yes. Yes.
I think it's the number one performance enhancing drug.
It's my favorite thing.
It is. Yes. I'm on board the sleep train. So our second question is, what is bringing you joy right now?
Ooh, I'm getting married. And so I think that just like thoughts of the future and just my life with my fiance and what the future holds. Like I find myself like in those runs by myself with idle time, like thinking about that.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, it's so exciting.
That is so exciting. All right. And our last question is, what is your kryptonite? The one thing that you love so much that you just can't do without. So it could be food or it could be exercise or it could be reading. Like, what is that one thing for you?
Oh, I really love waffles.
Say that louder, Kelsey. Come on.
I really love waffles. Like I kind of panic when there's not any, in multiple forms too. Like I want the mix. I want a frozen toaster waffle. I want like a stroop waffle in the house. And so actually I was in North Carolina working and I got home and there weren't any waffles in the house. And I just thought that it was common knowledge. I do the grocery store shopping just because I am particular, obviously. But I just thought it was common knowledge that when you go on the trip, like your significant other, like buys the things that and replaces all of the things in the house that like you would miss. And so I was gone over a weekend. So none of the grocery store shopping got done. And I remember like coming in from my run, like ready to like eat some freezer waffles. And I just felt so inconvenienced that they weren't.
This sounds like a tragedy to me.
This is a really good learning moment for your relationship, it sounds like.
I just sort of asked, I'm like, can you imagine like being gone and the one thing that makes you tick during the week is not there?
What did he say?
He's so kind. He's like, okay, I'll add it to the next time category.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. See, at least you worked that out before you got married.
Good point.
So I'll send you some waffle mix as a wedding gift.
Sweet.
Oh my gosh, Kelsey,
right.
This has been so much fun. So tell us like what's your website, social media handle, all that good stuff.
So I'm going to throw out 3 different names, which I do realize is not the most strategic thing I've ever done. So on Instagram, I'm sports dietitian Kelsey. I do have a private Facebook group. It's called Endurance Sports Nutrition. So I try to really make it endurance sports related. A lot of times I'll do more live videos in there. And then my website is meteornutrition.com.
I totally get it why Kacy wanted you here. I think the way that you handle patients or clients and the way that you think about nutrition is so in line with how we work with clients and think. So I'm just grateful that there's somebody like you out there.
Oh, well, thanks so much for having me. It was a lot of fun, and it's so fun to see similarities and common themes. So I enjoyed conversating with you ladies a lot.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that it resonated with you and that you learned something. If you enjoyed this podcast, please rate and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps increase our visibility within the platform so that more awesome people like you can find us.
If you'd like to support us further, pretty please, you can visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/morethanmiles. That's www.patreon.com/morethanmiles. Or for a few dollars, you can help the show grow and keep going, as well as receive exclusive perks like monthly Q&As with us. Until next time, remember to run the mile you're in, and that training is so much more than miles.